Welcome to Directionally Correct, a people analytics podcast with Cole and Scott, and today's guest, Scott Reida, workforce strategist at Amazon Web Services. Hey, Directionally Correct fans. If you're looking to stay connected to the podcast, make sure to subscribe to our Substack newsletter, watch our videos on YouTube, or listen to the podcast on your app of choice. This podcast is dedicated to you to help educate and entertain you on how to effectively do people analytics. We are a listener-supported podcast, so please consider becoming a patron. If you'd like to support the podcast by becoming a patron, you can find a link to sign up in the show notes or at patron.podbean.com/directionallycorrect. Thanks for being a listener. All opinions are our own and do not reflect those of any other organization.
I have this girl cat that whenever I'm on a phone call and I hear someone else, it will just walk up on my desk, shift it so its butt is facing right at the camera. I'm like, for the love of God, cat. So I've kicked the cat out. So
yeah, well, we're definitely keeping that in the podcast.
Oh, come on, Cole. All right.
Well, Scott, tell me what the rule of 72 is. How about that? How about we start there?
The rule of
and what does it have to do with workforce skill obsolescence?
So the idea with that is that in the world of finance and portfolio management, the rule of 72 says that you divide 72 by whatever the interest rate is or the rate it's gaining, and that is how long it takes for it to double. So if you've got $100 and it's gaining at 6% interest rate, you do 72 divided by 6, it'll take 12 years to double. So the idea is to see, can I morph that? Or actually, Kristen worked on this with me. So can we morph that into something in the world of people analytics? So the idea is that if you gather some data related to the role itself and you see the average gain on the skills in the job is 6%, you could theoretically say that maybe that job is kind of being replacing of itself after about that 12-year period. And of course, if it's some other job like legal, theirs is a lower rate. Let's just say it's 2. So essentially, you could almost work your entire career, and really your annual kind of learning is kind of repeating what you are already proficient at. But these other ones, you're really replacing what you have to know. So like if you're a data scientist, you need to learn a new way of coding, a new coding language.
Yeah. So this was based on a fascinating article that you and friend of the podcast, Kristen Sabo, wrote together. And I think what's interesting and intuitive about it is essentially what you're saying is even if you had the same job for a certain period of time, the skills in that job over enough, like again, using the rule of 72, will be completely transformed to where you ultimately have almost a completely different job, even if you're in the same job title. Mm-hmm. So I found it fascinating.
Yeah, and we weren't thinking it would be totally replaced. There are still going to be some, like SQL will still be around. But it's just generally speaking, comparing one role to another, where does the focus need to be with learning? Those ones where that overlapping replacement essentially is higher. And, it's not a perfect science. It's more like a structure, if you will. As I mentioned, the data was gathered out of like LLMs. So there's a lot of questions as far as how good is that data. They're really good at making structure. It's directionally correct, but it's not. Yes. It could be better. You have to just do that in there. And there are obviously some better resources to get good data for the roles and how they're evolving over time. But if you get that data, plug it into that rule of 72, it probably is relatively accurate as far as the difference between like a program manager, a software engineer, data scientist, how that replacement looks. That helps you focus on not only like how much you need to learn, how like that rate, but what the things actually are that you need to learn and train.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, I'll just kind of tee you up here a little bit. So you're a workforce strategist at AWS, and I believe you don't even know Scott Hines, who also works there, who's the co-host of the podcast, who's not here today. I don't know. I don't think you guys know each other. Well, if you want to give the backstory in that, I'll let you.
Oh, well, I'll give you like 20 seconds. I have never had a call with him except until yesterday. He was actually on a call with our team. So until yesterday, I have never had a call with him, but finally I actually did see his face. So,
well, that's wild. What a small world. Well, we both work at the same company, but until yesterday didn't know each other. But the reason why I reached out to you is when we started this podcast, obviously we have the nerdery, we have Cole's Corner where we cover articles, and I found you through some of the stuff that you were posting on LinkedIn in terms of some of the articles, and they hearkened me back to a previous era of LinkedIn before it started to really not be that good. And there was an era in LinkedIn where people in the people analytics space and workforce planning and talent intelligence would just kind of share like neat ideas out there with the world, or here's something I learned, or here's how to do XYZ. And all the content on LinkedIn was just awesome. Like, it was better than buying a book most of the time. It was better. Like, there weren't any podcasts really at the time, so you couldn't go listen to a podcast. And it was just a fascinating way to get resources on things. And I saw that you kind of started posting things that kind of harken back to that era where you would just have a neat idea. You'd say, hey, here's how to do this. And so I covered probably, I don't know, at this point, we probably covered 4 or 5 of your articles on the podcast. And I've been trying to wrangle you to get you on here for a little bit. So we finally got that. So I'm really excited to have you here, Scott. And I wanted to start with that rule of 72, because again, just a really neat concept, applying something from another field to a problem in, kind of the skills workforce planning space. And I don't know, just give you a chance to talk about some of those things today. So I'm really glad to have you on.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, man. Well, let's get down into it. So recently, you and I actually published an article together about Michael Jordan. And I think you published a whole series on it after the fact as well. Do you want to talk about that at all? And what's the premise behind it? And what are some of the kind of neat ideas you put into play there?
So there was another article, as with a lot of articles, there was some other topic that was being covered. And then the question came up of, is the way you do a prompt, is there a way that the phrasing can change the outcome? As in, if I have some kind of anchoring bias where I say, an example of the answer might be blah, blah, blah. Is me giving that input creating a problem in the output where it uses anchoring? So you and I talked about how can we make an article about this in a topic that would be interesting to other people. So basketball is, of course, a good one. I grew up, I don't know about now, but back 20 years ago, NBA was I watched it quite a bit, especially the Chicago Bears. So I, of course, have a little bit of bias for Michael Jordan. So I wanted to see, is there some way we can play with the data around basketball players to prove who is the best basketball player, at least with the data we gather in the data that is imperfect. And just try to see, is there a way we can not only prove that, but also see if there's anchoring bias as well. And what we did for that first one was ChatGPT. So essentially we had 5 test cases. So we gave a suggestion on assists per game where it said, we want you to weight all of these metrics. An example of that might be assists per game. You'd say like it's 90% of the total, and the total has to add up to 100. And then there was another for 10%. There was another where we suggested I want Michael Jordan to be the best, LeBron James. And then there was another where we said old school, I believe, right? Someone before like maybe the 80s who was the best of all time. And of course, the control where it didn't have anything at all. And sure enough, it proved that there was anchoring bias. The 90 and the 10 were very significant. And coming out of that, you were probably pushing me to see if we had that article about repeatability, for instance. So can we redo this test? And the sample size wasn't that big; it was only 30 per each one. So redid it for 30 again, and sure enough, the results were the same. But coming out of that, another article was, let's play with the other Gemini, Copilot, Claude, and then ChatGPT again to see if they've gotten better since we last tested it. And they had not. But you could actually see a difference between each of the different LLMs as far as, are some of them better at weeding out that prompt issue? Let's see. I want to say Gemini and Claude were just on one. They fell for just on one. ChatGPT fell for everything, and then Copilot was in between. But the hope is to kind of expand that out to do other things. I want to do trivia next. So I took pictures of all the trivia questions. So I go to trivia usually every Monday and sometimes Thursday. So I took pictures of all of the questions and was going to put those questions into each of the LLMs just to see, is one of them better at it? So that's the next one.
Yeah. Well, and I'll kind of give you the macro view of why I thought this one was important. Is a lot of people, much like, because everything in the world is just so political and everybody chooses a side, they either go to AI is going to solve everything or AI is not going to do anything. And when it comes to science and how to do scientific research, what I thought was the most valuable thing about this was to show, here's how you can actually use these GPTs to do research, right? To actually conduct a scientific study with a true experimental design with multiple instances of different kinds of observations that you're trying to make. and then actually test the results. But just like with any good scientific paper pre-AI, you could also point out the limitations and the biases of the research methodology that was put into play. And so I just thought it was a really excellent use case to talk about how you can use AI to do science. And I thought it was fascinating. So I thought it was really great work. And you had some fascinating ideas in that, Scott.
Sweet. Thanks. And some of the other pieces that came out of the last one was if you get rid of the bias, and I know there's a role where they're discussing like weaving in prompt engineering as a skill or a role. But let's just pretend you can get rid of the bias. So then what is the best model? ChatGPT actually was the most, how should I say this? It was the most refined or close knit as far as its answers were concerned. So like Copilot, their answers were all over the place. So if you ask it for a number, it would say 10 to 22, they were all over the place, lots of variability. But ChatGPT was very fine tuned. It would always say 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. Claude was very similar, and then it was Gemini after that. But if you can fix all the problems, then which is the best model? So it's kind of like a stage process where initially you might say, well, Claude is the best one. It passed all the tests by far by the best, as far as all the things we were testing. But if you can fix all the problems, the best isn't necessarily the one that you started with.
Well, let's take a step back, Scott. So, like, what are you good at? Like, what are you known for? What do you do in your day job? Where have you worked? Like, give us some of the basics of why people should listen and trust you.
Interesting. So I've worked in quite a few different areas. So I started as a nuke engineer, got into process improvement, did budgeting, got into more process improvement, then wanted to get into people analytics, and that brought in dashboards. Then I went into talent strategy at Boeing, and now I'm doing workforce planning at AWS. So I've done quite a bit of different things before. Education is also a bit scattered. So that has engineering, management of IT, MBA, and international relations. So that's also a bit broad. So I suppose that the experience and the education has been, broad, not, to overuse the term. So I think that I would say, since the scope of work includes a few different areas, maybe there could be a little more trust that, like the rule of 72, maybe there are some ideas that don't necessarily relate that I could think of that other people wouldn't necessarily pull into the equation. So there's a lot of experience, but it's been fairly deep in lots of different areas. So I would say that gives some credibility. I recognize that I'm not great in everything. So I think that also fitted to the role. When I need help with something, I know that I have shortcomings. So I know who to probably ask for some extra help.
Well, so did you kind of glossed over something? Did you say you're a nuclear engineer?
That was the first job. Yeah, I still have a hard hat somewhere, but yeah. So the Navy, so I was a civilian for the Navy. So they hire mostly mechanical and electrical engineers to be nuke engineers. The main reason is it's really just a big heater surrounded by a bunch of valves, pipes, and panels to monitor and control.
Yeah, because that's what I think of when I think of nuclear power. I don't think of just like the power of the sun powering things. Like I just think, oh, it's just a bunch of valves and pipes.
Well, the parts that you're working on a regular basis that they need people hired for, it's usually just. I was in reactor support systems, so essentially when subs carriers come in to be worked on, you want to get most of the radioactive water out of the system, so you have to discharge it, filter it, turn it into something else that's a little more safe, and then put it back in, that kind of thing. So that you don't need someone who knows how reactors work for that. You need to know how to manage pipes, pressure, filtration system. So
I like how nonchalant you are about all that. Like to me, that's like it's fascinating, and just like you're playing with the power of gods, and you're just like, yeah, it's just dirty water. We're just trying to clean it out.
Yeah, some of the work that I questioned whether it was a good idea to do, like spend so much time in the reactor compartments. But yeah, it's that was a fun first job. They're definitely.
I'm sorry.
I was going to say they're definitely not made for people who are taller, though. My hard hat looks like a football helmet. It's got many dents, chipped paint everywhere. So and then one time I ran into a light in the mess hall and broke it. So I guess I tested the durability of some of the stuff on the carriers. But yeah, it's definitely not good to be 6'5" on submarines, though.
Yeah. Well, I know this may feel like it's all over the place, but I think one of the things I find interesting about you is you're a pretty eclectic guy. I think you also do like a newsletter on fantasy football, right? And what is your fascination in that space?
So I was pulled into fantasy football by a friend at the shipyard actually, and it has been a side like source of enjoyment since, and also sadness because I still haven't won the league he runs. Um,
Well, maybe don't read the newsletter. You won't win.
yeah, that's true. I win. I do very well in other leagues, but everything that's run by his name's Troy. Everything run by Troy. He is the master and commander of that league. Um, I think it's kind of the nice thing about fantasy football. It's actually where I first started using Tableau because I, I I wanted to make a dashboard to prove how much better I was than everyone else at this one league. So I was like, what better than to have a dashboard with a visualization that shows my rank move.
That's a bold move when you're not in first place.
Well, in that one I did win. That was a Virginia league. So
Okay.
yeah. So I was able to beat everybody in that one. But no, the one he runs is very similar to an actual league where they have free agency, but like by the time you get to the actual draft, all the good players are gone, and he's really good at everything that's pre-draft. So he already has a winning team before the draft even starts. Very good at managing the money. But as far as that is concerned, one of the really cool things about that is it brought me into playing with the dashboards, but the newsletter, I haven't played with it much until lately. I'm going to get it going again, and actually from your help with Substack, I'm going to try to get it going again probably in about 2 weeks. So we'll see how that goes. I don't know if I'm going to play with podcasts or making videos. I think that would be kind of a nice addition to it. So maybe this year just get the articles working and figuring out how to make the data work and get everything, just kind of get myself back into the groove of that every week. And then maybe next year do videos with it as well.
You heard it here, folks. Scott Reida, fantasy football guru, starting his own podcast, launching it off the Directionally Correct episode. So well done. Well, Scott, I had to give you credit for being simultaneously the most and least prepared guest I think I've ever had. You didn't apparently one must have gone to your spam folder, get the agenda for today, but you did send me an insane amount of resources about things you wanted to cover today. You want to talk about the Gartner hype cycles or any of the other stuff you sent me?
In fairness, I got a new phone, and I have a whole story about getting a phone.
All right, tell it.
You want a story about the failures of getting a phone? So I had this phone that was probably about 6 years old, and it wouldn't charge anymore unless I used one of those magnet pieces, and I couldn't put more pictures on. I've got a 6 and 8 year old, so I have to make videos basically 18 times a day. So I need a new phone. So I went into, we'll save them we'll just say it's a carrier. I went into their store, and I said, I need to do a trade-in for this. So they said, okay, we're going to give you $820, I think, toward the new phone. But I wanted a 1 terabyte phone. But the one they actually sent me was a 512. So I saw that in the update on the mail. So I run into the office or the store, and I say, you're sending me the wrong phone. Do I accept it or reject this thing? They told me to take the phone. So when I got the phone, I brought it into the store and returned it so I could get the new phone. Well, what happened is apparently when you do a return, they have to transfer the phone number from your current phone to that phone and then back to your other phone. So the problem happened because they transferred the phone number, but they weren't able to transfer it back. So I had to take the wrong phone for about a week. So I had one phone that would work as a phone, and all of my apps were on my old phone. The new phone came in the mail. It's not over yet. New phone comes in the mail. I go back to the store. They transfer the number to the new phone, but they can't take the loaner as a return. So I actually still have it. There it is. So I have this $1,600 liability on my desk that I can't seem to return. So they're trying to figure out how to send me a box, like a mailing thing, so I can return it and then not have to pay the restocking fee. So because it was their fault for ordering me the wrong phone. But whatever the case, over the last week, I haven't gotten emails properly from one of my 3 phones at the time. So that is why I didn't get your email. But I did see it this morning. Sorry about that. But you want to talk about hype cycles. Let's talk about hype cycles.
Well, I'd just say that's the titillating story. It is about as good as every conversation we've ever had. There's always something like that. Phone purgatory right now, so you're just gonna have to deal with it. But yeah, let's talk Gartner hype cycles.
So Gartner hype cycles. So I'm a big fan of Gartner. I think that they're very forward looking, and whenever there's something that's on the horizon, they are one of the first to actually put it out there and put their name to it. So whenever they have the thing called the hype cycle, as you said, there's something that's complementary to it called a priority matrix, which essentially has everything that's on the hype cycle in a matrix that shows the level of impact expected from each thing. So hype cycles essentially, they probably have 50 of them. So when new technology is coming out, they start at what they call the innovation trigger. And then as it's called hype, the amount of expectations around it ramps up very quickly. And that's where it's basically the greatest thing since sliced bread. I'd like to know what they had before sliced bread, if that was the greatest thing at the time. But greatest thing since sliced bread at the very top. And then people are, early adopters grabbing it, trying it out, and they realize this is a piece of garbage. And it falls into the trough of disillusionment hell, where basically there's nothing that's going to come out of this technology. Then you have some late adopters and some of those early adopters picking it back up again and saying, well, it's actually good for this and this. So it starts to travel up the slope of enlightenment, and then you have full adoption over here. Point of all this is they have a lot of these different hype cycles with all these different technologies on them, and software engineering probably has like 8 or 9 of them. So you can take all of these different technologies and capabilities and kind of put them in one spreadsheet and review all of them and whittle it down to the ones that are applicable to a company's like priority roles. And you can actually figure out over time, like over the next 10 years, what are the skills that are going to be relevant for your priority roles? And like, how's that actually going to ramp? What level of impact are each of them going to play? Good example of this is if you had done that 5-6 years ago, chatbots were on every single one of them. And of course, LLMs are kind of advanced chatbots. So if you had actually done some of this planning long ago, you could have been prepared for this. But I think a lot of companies are doing catch up at the moment. So a little bit better planning with the help of Gartner and other resources would have helped mitigate that.
That's fascinating. Well, what else you want to talk about, Scott? I know you sent me a bunch of stuff. I don't even know what to cover. What do you want to talk about today?
I did read your thing while I was walking this morning. So I had about 50 minutes to read it. So let's see. What was next on your list?
Well, we could talk about RC cars, or that you make stereo equipment, or you refurbish things. What do you want to go?
Let's. So I actually brought over my RC car because I saw that on your list. So if like 12-year-old boys like to do something like race RC cars, lift weights, play video games, those are kind of my hobbies. So this is called a truggy. It is that they're pretty huge. If you ran into someone's ankle, it'd probably break it off. But RC car racing is really a cool hobby because you learn how to tinker with cars and RC cars at the same time. They're very similar to real cars. I wasn't very good, and I say I wasn't very good because there are tiers of racers. So I'd say there's always this one guy who's the best. So there's like one person in tier 1. And where I used to race, his name was Bobby, which obviously is someone who's good at racing, or Bobby's a great name for you. So before he even started, he was going to be good. Then tier 2, there are probably 2 or 3 people, and then there's tier 3. I was the best of tier 3, so I would usually get 4th or 5th. But the problem was, at that tier, nobody's any good, so you're getting lapped by the 3rd lap. Everyone, first racer is racing you by lap 3. You're not very good. So that was me. But the cool thing about racing cars is you learn patience. You would think you just want to go fast the whole time, but the people who are really good, they'll go over jumps and they'll know how to stop their car at the bottom of a jump, and then immediately they'll go around a turn. I'm the person who's just going too fast, go around, and how do I describe this?
You hit the wall.
If this is a turn, well, you don't usually hit the wall. You're not going that fast. But if this is a turn and you have a ramp that like a bunch of jumps that lands here, really good racers will land their car and it actually stops practically, and they curl around this like that. I would fly over it all the way over here and then have to spill all the way over here. I'm going faster, but I'm actually going slower around the track because I didn't have the control. So RC racing, I think, is a good test of learning to use patience properly, and you're actually faster if you're slower.
I got to tell people who are listening to audio only, there's been a few instances already on this podcast. You might want to check out the video because Scott's making some great hand motions.
It's a racetrack.
It's some sock puppetry going on over here.
Yeah.
So well done, Scott.
Yeah, I see there's a kid thing over there. I don't know if I can involve that at all, but Yeah, RC car racing is pretty fun. And of course, I like to play Call of Duty,
Yeah.
which is
Well, I want to take us back to the beginning. So when I teed you up, I talked about you kind of harkening back to an earlier era of sharing ideas out publicly. Why did you start doing that? Like, what was your motivation? You've written about a bunch of different topics at this point, covering a lot of ground, and I see it as very generous what you're doing. Why were you doing it, and kind of why do you continue to do it?
um just more like curiosity, and I like to play with data a lot, and I miss using Tableau. So essentially, everything I'm putting out involves Tableau and playing with data. And I think that generative AI is obviously very, very helpful. And things, and I mentioned, you know where your shortcomings are. And I think that Gen AI is helping to, fill gaps that I had before. So it's kind of the co-pilot, if you will. So if I, let's see, we talked about the talent hubs, for instance. Like, I don't want to I don't want to have to gather and come up with like fake data to prove the point. So I can have it, I'll structure the question.
Well, explain the talent hub. I think we covered that with Chris Sailing, I believe, on that episode. If people want to check it out, but explain the talent hub one to the folks who didn't check out that episode or read the article.
Okay, so if you're a company and you're considering 10 locations of where to put some talent pools. Let's just say you have data scientists and program managers and software engineers, and you want to figure out what is the best location to consider for those, or top three. The things you might want to have on mind, metric wise, to compare each of those locations might be compensation, the size of the talent pool, growth rate, ease of doing business, and probably add 10 more to that. So if you could come up with the different metrics, let's just say you come up with 8, you can then go to ChatGPT and say, I'm looking at some different locations. Here are the ones I'm looking into. Here are the metrics I'm considering. What other things would you add to this? So it'll come up with 4 or 5 other metrics, and then it'll come up with 3 or 4 other locations you hadn't considered. Let's say you want to say, give me some other locations that are not in the United States, in Europe, with sizable talent pools. It'll give you some decent ones to start with. So they might not be perfectly accurate, but it'll be directionally correct, if you will. And then, so you have a good list of metrics. You have a good list of countries or cities. Then you don't have to come up with this fake data. You can come up with data that's relatively accurate. It's not perfect. Again, you want to use...
Like, that was my only criticism of it. It's like, you're trusting the data coming out of this a lot if you're actually making a business decision based on it. And I would say, just because by nature of where I work, where we're actually using the real data on a lot of those criteria that you mentioned. Mm-hmm. And I've actually done it kind of side by side to see what my analysis versus a GPT analysis would do. And a lot of times the data is wildly wrong. Mm-hmm. I would say just be careful what you trust when it comes to doing that type of analysis.
Yeah. So make the structure and the idea, build the template in Gen AI, and then come to Cole for the data.
I love that advertisement. Well done. All right.
Not queued up, but at all. That's good. So, it's really good for structure. It's really good for helping, give you other ideas you hadn't necessarily considered. So I feel like that's a great, as I said, co-pilot, if you will. And then you get all the data. And I mentioned, if before Gen AI, I would have had to make all the data. So I would have had to say, give me, I think reasonably this location would have because you can't use your actual sources. You need to actually, you have to take steps away from that and pretend you don't know the real data. So it has to be blind on that. So if Gen AI can provide it to you, then you have taken yourself out of that equation as far as your licenses that you're using. So you get all that data and you kind of process it in a similar way as to how it structured it, which is how you kind of dictated it to it, and maybe it gives you some different things to tweak it. But the output of this is I get to do it in Tableau, so I get to keep that skill kind of current, if you will. If you haven't used it for 5-6 years and you want to come back to it, like I want to use it for fantasy football. If I hadn't kept up with Tableau for the last 4 or 5 years, then when I want to do fantasy football stuff again, I have to relearn everything.
You should do a Tableau dashboard of your RC car skills and how you stack up there as well.
Oh,
fascinating.
There's no improvement at all. I have no patience when it comes to the racing. So I'm just like, oh, I'm in last place. I'm just going to go as fast as I can go. And then, I then run into a wall. And then there are all these people who have to, you started the rabbit hole. There are all these people on the track who have to flip people's cars over and put them back on the track. they're all just focused on my car, like eyes focused. Where's Scott going to flip this car next? But yeah, I think these articles are fun to just keep yourself current, and also I think it's good to share. I'm not sharing anything that's. I don't think any of these things are something that someone would go and create a business out of, and not let others, use that structure, if you will. It's public.
No, I just see it as like it's helping people. Well, so like maybe I'm kind of going to a deeper thought that I have on this subject, which is there's kind of classical ways people learn things, and then I would call there's like new age ways. The classical way is you go to a formal schooling mechanism, whether it be an actual school or through like some kind of academy, through your work. You learn a formal set of skills that has a defined set of duration of the program. It could be hard skills, it could be soft skills, and then you take some kind of test at the end, and then you are ordained that you have that skill and that kind of competency or whatever it may be, right? And then in the new age, which is why again I liked the kind of the old LinkedIn version of doing things. It's like, hey, here's some things I was playing around with. Do you want to play around with them too? And you just kind of use your own Lego blocks of building up an entire kind of corpus of skills and knowledge. Some people call that being an autodidact, but I just say in the age of the internet, you can find the answer, and especially in the age of AI, you can find the answer to almost any question. You don't need any kind of guidance. The only thing you need is initiative. And so if you are willing to go off and kind of learn these things, but what I see people like you doing, and what I think, some of the stuff that I've done in the past, is just giving people a trail of breadcrumbs so that they can learn themselves. And I think really that's the future of development, or it's the present of development. And so I just think it's fascinating what you've been doing.
All right. Well, thanks. And I think it's good. It's actually working through like a case study, if you will. So when you learn theory of something, going from that step to actually being able to apply it in a business case study, it's a bit of a leap. And you're not just bringing in one topic, you have to bring in 5 different topics and figure out how to weave them together. So I think case studies are really great for that.
Absolutely.
Let's see. I want to talk a little bit about.
There we go. We're getting started. We're cooking on gas now.
Oh, have you ever seen what is that guy's podcast that they're like 3 hours, or are they 6 hours? Like they're basically a marathon. I was watching something by Malcolm Gladwell. He was talking about one of them where he's like, yeah, the real scary or meaty stuff comes out at the once you've been in there for like 2.5 hours, then they go off the rails. So it only took a half hour.
We could have started here with you, Scott. You're very different than many of our guests, I promise.
I've seen a few. Yeah, a little less reserved, probably. I want to talk about the everyone gets paid the same, and how AI might play into that. So that's something that
Well, I'm gonna force you, since it's my idea. I'm gonna force you to tee it up, and then you bring me in where you want me to, because I don't know where you want to go with this.
Oh, well, it could go in a lot of different directions. So my thought is, so initially the idea of everyone gets paid the same is, from the way I'm looking at it.
Okay, you're doing a terrible job of teeing this up. Everyone gets paid the same was a theory that I created a few years ago, wrote up an article. I've talked about it a bunch of times on the podcast, but if you've never come across it, because it's been a while since I've talked about it, and what Scott actually doesn't know is I have a kind of a follow-up article coming out about it in a few weeks. I've actually been working on it for quite a while, but that's the tee up here. It's an idea. Explain kind of what the thesis of it is, and then we can get into the discussion.
Everyone does different tasks, but at the end of the day, the level of effort, I would assume you get paid for the same amount on the level of effort. So if I'm going to do a really terrible job of explaining this.
Yeah, you are.
That's why I said I was going to share my vision of how.
Okay, you share your vision, then I'll back into it. How about that?
Okay, so you get paid about roughly the same based on the amount of mental or physical exertion you put into something. So I think that right now you don't get paid the same, is my point of view.
Ooh.
Because I think that right now, if you do something 100 times more effectively or quickly, you get paid much, substantially more for that work. But my thought is that as AI and other tools become more involved in work across different industries, the level of separation that someone has will go down. So I won't be able to be 100 times more effective or productive as you, because AI will close that gap. So I won't be 100 times, maybe I'll be 20 times better at you than this. Because it's brought you up to my, the average has gone up. So my separation from you has gone down. And I think that as tools get more and more good at these different tasks, that gap will continue to close. And eventually I won't be any better because AI will have augmented everyone else to the level that I'm at. It might never get to 1-to-1 ratio, but I'm just saying it'll eventually close to the point by industry and job type that difference will be essentially nothing. And then there will be no justification to pay me more than someone else because I'm not more productive or higher, have higher quality.
Yeah, I think you're actually explaining the theory, it's not the alternative.
Okay.
So I'll kind of give the basis of how I came into having the thought in the first place. Is I noticed this is all the way back when I was an individual contributor, is I would notice myself, but also in other people, what would happen is somebody would go from like a junior analyst to a senior analyst, and they were super excited they got this promotion. Like maybe they got a pay increase of 20%. And then lo and behold, what they would find is because they would get additional responsibilities because of this promotion, they were having to work 20% more hours to be able to get that, to be able to be a successful performer in their new job. And so I noticed this pattern where it's like, did you actually get a 20% raise or did you just have to work 20% more time? And so it led me down this rabbit hole of, does everybody actually just get paid the same for I called it miscellaneous heartache. Somewhat as like a tongue-in-cheek way of describing it. If you say there's a linear relationship between the amount of miscellaneous heartache that you have and the amount of pay that you receive. And this could be based on supply and demand. It could be based on the amount of education that goes into a particular role. It could be based on the physical requirements or the mental requirements or the emotional requirements. And if you go and you actually plot this type of data, there's a linear relationship between the two. And I think that's what you're describing here, is that as AI enters the equation, the barriers to entry lower, therefore the miscellaneous heartache goes down, therefore the pay is actually going to decrease, therefore everybody gets paid the same, would be my version of what you said. Because the thing is, once I started looking into this theory, I swear I see it everywhere. I got to the point where I used to annoy my co-host, Scott, not you, Scott, where I would just send him an article, see another example of everyone gets paid the same, another example of everyone gets paid the same. We just covered it in an episode the other day about like how there's a relationship between the immorality of an industry that you're in or the job that you're in and how much you get paid. So the more immoral a job is, the more pay it gets. And I was like, see, and it's like a perfect linear relationship. And I was like, see, everybody gets paid the same.
So the one that doesn't fall into the model, if you will, are like really, really specialized experts. Let me think of an example. Like,
how many years did it take to get to that level of expertise? I would say that factors into the pay.
That's good. I like that. That's a good argument.
I promise you, once you see it everywhere.
So like an advertisement. So you might have an entire team of people spending a week to come up with some advertisement where an expert comes up with the idea in 10 minutes. So that person gets paid more and they did in a shorter amount of time. So it doesn't fall into the model that you're saying. I know now you're going to say the education, but everybody, some people are just
exactly what it is. How many years did you have to spend in that education to, again, miscellaneous heartache, to be able to have that seniority, to be able to get paid more for that one particular instance of work?
I like the argument of the education that leads up to it. But let's just pretend everyone had the same amount of contribution, learning, jobs, everything that led up to it. They're all equal, but one person can do it in 5 minutes and the other person takes a week to do it. What I think
that person will actually get paid more, and that's because that fits into my definition of talent is performance minus effort. And so what you're saying is they get the equivalent output for less effort. Therefore, that person will actually get paid more.
Yes. Okay. So we agree on that. But here's what I was saying a bit ago. that difference where they're getting paid more is going to contract over time as the AI tools get better. So the
But
people
that means that their effort would actually would be decreasing because AI is getting better.
that person still does it in 5 minutes, but the team that took a week to do it, eventually they'll do it in 5 minutes. So the expert is still the expert. He can do it without AI augmentation, but the other people are going to use all these tools. Hopefully they adopt them and the tools actually get there. It might not be tomorrow, maybe 10 years from now, but they will get better to the point that they are rising to the level of that expert. But of course, then everyone gets paid the same.
Well, and what would happen at the same time is either one of two things, and this is actually a big societal debate that's going on right now, which is, if everyone gets that much better because of AI, are you just 10 times more productive as a team, or you do need 10 times fewer people to do that job anymore? And the reason why you have that debate is because everyone gets paid the same. Because really, what you're trying to understand is this kind of, this word gets overused, but an equitable way of paying for people to do work. They're either 10 times more productive and we pay them the same, or we need 10 times less of them. And therefore, one person gets paid the same if there's 10 of them, and everyone else is let go.
I don't know.
Actually, I love this conversation because I've wanted to talk about this on the podcast so many times. And every time we've had like labor economists on, and I brought it up and they're just like, yeah, I think it's a cool theory. I've been invited to MBA programs to speak about it. And everybody's like, oh, this is neat. But what you're really actually like kind of like pressure testing the idea. And I just think this is so fun.
Good. So what is good? So there was this book called Rise. Let me see if I can find it really fast. Probably not. I want to say it was called Rise of the Robots. It came out maybe like 8 or 9 years ago. And have you seen that one by chance? I think it was Martin Ford, maybe is the author. Probably not, because I never remember who writes the books I read. But the last chapter is what happens with society once automation, AI takes over all these jobs. Like you can't have there aren't any jobs for anyone anymore. And one of your suggested outcomes of having one person working and the other 10, that's that solution where you end up with one person and 9 people unemployed. And his thought was that everyone would have to be given some kind of a stipend by the government or the different companies that are all profiting from, this new way of society working. I have no idea how that's going to pan out. I mean,
I'll tell you how it's going to pan out. They're going to, somebody's going to propose what you're saying, universal basic income. People are going to start getting the checks and they're going to realize they get really bored and everybody's going to start killing each other. And then it's all going to fall apart. That's what I predict will happen. But that has nothing to do with everybody getting paid the same. That's just my own personal prediction. With that said, Scott, do you want to join me in Cole's Corner?
Sure, let's do Cole's Corner.
All right. Welcome to Cole's Corner.
Your corner.
We're going to switch it up a little bit. I learned a little bit about some of your hobbies. And so the first question I have for you in the rapid fire section is, what is the best movie genre and why? Because you mentioned you're obsessed with watching movies, and you even mentioned it before we started recording that you were so excited about this afternoon because you're going to get to go watch another movie.
Oh man.
And so and do the movies get the ideas flowing for you? Is this a part of one of the places you draw creativity from?
Oh, these aren't supposed to be really rapid, are they?
I want to hear. I mean, it doesn't have to be that rapid.
All right, so my favorite kind of movies are usually dramas, maybe murder mysteries. I would say my favorite movie is top 5 would be Knives Out. Comes to mind really quickly. Good Will Hunting is up there. LA Confidential, 12 Angry Men, The Guy Who Knows All the Questions for the game show based on life events. Slumdog Millionaire, that's up there too. So I don't know. I'd say overall our dramas. I especially like things that involve people getting murdered, thrillers, types of things my wife writes. Here you go. Plug for her book, Neighborhood Watch. Basically, bad people getting murdered. That's kind of the genre of books and movies I like. What else do those get ideas moving? Hopefully the murder mysteries don't get ideas moving.
And the person who solves them.
Yeah. I think that, yeah, that would be an interesting thing to study. I'm sure someone has done studies on this. Like, do you have more innovative thinking after certain kinds of movies? I'll bet you, like, I'll put on Moneyball in the background, Moneyball, Big Short, that kind of movie in the background because I've seen it so many thinking times, and that's almost relaxing. I don't have to watch it, but a little bit of distraction seems to help get juices flowing. Maybe, if you can't focus for 2.5, 3 hours nonstop, sometimes if you have something on in the background, you suddenly can. So maybe that little bit of distraction helps. So I think that a certain kind of movie on in the background might actually help with thinking. As far as do you come out of watching one of those and have new ideas? Maybe. I think that if you watch like Minority Report, something like that, and they have all these features. Have you seen that movie?
Yeah.
Okay. A lot of those things have come true. I think that if you see something like that where you actually see it as a case study, like you see him walking into these different locations, it sees his eyes, it knows what products to sell him because it knows his history. I think that if someone were making apps and they watched something like that and those things weren't around yet, yeah, I think that certainly would be that kind of trigger for you to go and start building. So yeah, I think that the kinds of movies and the things that are in those, the scenes, certainly can spark ideas.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'd say I similar to you. I think 3 things really get my creative juices flowing, especially if I've done them kind of in sequences. One is exercise. The second is like listening to like just a really interesting podcast or interesting movie or TV show or something like that. Kind of gets the juices flowing. And then while I'm actually like writing or creating something is like listening to like classical music or like you said, having something on in the background that's not too distracting, but it also kind of keeps me focused. So I love that. All right. I got the next question for you though. What's the place you've never been to that you most like to go and why?
I'm noodling. I've seen so I've been to Venice and Rome, I'd like to go back to Europe and use my passport. So the place I would like to go, I'll put it as Amsterdam, because I've seen a lot of different movies that have scenes in Amsterdam. It looks like it looks similar to Venice, but it looks cleaner. So I think that and my wife has been there before, so she could show me around. so I'll vote for Amsterdam.
Yeah, that's a neat one. Well, why do you do what you do?
Why do I do what I do? So I've changed what I do rather often. So I like to keep learning. I like to do different things. As long as there's problems to be solved and some kind of component of math and talking. I don't want to be in a cubicle all day. So I like to get out and as you say, be chatty. So as long as I can learn, have problems to solve that are not obvious and they include a math component, that interests me.
Absolutely. So I got one big question for you. We haven't talked too much about your day job and your previous day jobs in the workforce planning space. So I thought I'd ask you, how should workforce planning be conducted at large firms from top to bottom? What does good look like? And is anyone doing this right? Because I'll tell you selfishly, I get asked this question all the time. Who's doing workforce planning right? How should you do it effectively? And I'd love to hear from somebody who's currently a practitioner in that space.
Well, I'll say that, of course, where I am, we're doing it perfectly. But if I were going to walk into anywhere that, let's just say, they didn't have a workforce planning mechanism in place, I think that the best way is good means that you're making the workforce as optimal as possible. You're allowing revenue to happen because the teams have been created in the best way. So I think the way to do that is to understand the process, the tasks they're actually doing. I don't think you necessarily have to do it as a kind of quote unquote zero-based workforce plan, but I think it's a good idea to just understand what is the work. Don't just assume that because there are 100 people doing X, Y, and Z that they are already optimized. I think it's good to scrap all that and just kind of look at it as a blank slate and say, if we were making this today and this is the work they're doing, how would we do it? So I'm a big, I mentioned in one of the articles, as you mentioned, talked about black belts. I think the black belts and change practitioners are going to have a big resurgence as AI implementation gets moving more rapidly. So I think that future is going to be, we're going to map out the biggest projects that people are doing. We're going to understand how to not only just get rid of waste, but figure out what tooling is going to be right for the different tasks they're doing. I don't think things should be just thrown at people. So you wouldn't just say ChatGPT is the best thing to augment this kind of work. so that's what you guys should be doing. It doesn't always make sense. So I think that you would try to figure out what are the biggest tasks, projects that people work on. How do we weave AI into them? How do we get rid of the waste? What is the remaining workforce that looks like, after you've done that? That's what I would say. That would be your ideal workforce. That doesn't always cover everybody. So you have support groups too. So it doesn't have admin. It doesn't necessarily have finance. It doesn't have HR. So you have to figure out how to weave those on top and what is the right amount of coverage to support the people actually driving revenue.
Well, cool. Well, you want to do some what am I reading right now?
What am I reading or what are you reading?
All right, we're going to do what am I reading? So I got the first one for you. Another kind of person like you who we've talked a few times about some of the stuff on the podcast is Rob Briner, really well known in the evidence-based management side of things. He has a LinkedIn post here called "Is Psychological Safety Overrated?" based on a 2023 review in the published literature. And he summarizes this to say some of the observed themes in the literature is we don't actually know much about how to increase psychological safety. We don't know much about the causes and effects of psychological safety. We don't know much about the meaning and measurement of psychological safety across different groups, countries, and cultures. And we don't know how much about the factors which affect or limit the relationships between psychological safety and outcomes. And so one of the things that you've seen, like many kind of psychological phenomena that make it into kind of the popular sphere, is that they're seen as like a universal good, right? Psychological safety is good. Everybody should adopt it. It's the best thing since sliced bread, to use your comment from earlier in the conversation. And then one of the things that you find is there's actually not a whole lot of evidence to talk about it. So before I give my thoughts on this one, I want to get your reactions to Rob's post. What did you think, Scott?
Well, the words "I don't know" or "we don't know" were said frequently. So it means there's a lot more to be explored. I want to say it also mentioned that having too much was also bad. So I think that maybe some stress is ideal. But it doesn't sound like we know exactly what the right amount of stress is. And it sounds like it varies based on the environment. So there probably is a right amount of stress or lack of psychological safety that is best for each environment. So I think that the next step is to maybe segment out the populations. Like if you're building software, there's probably a right amount of psychological safety or lack of safety in that environment. Same thing might be true for like a shipyard. If you're a mechanic on deck plates, maybe there's some kind of, you can't feel like you can just go do the work without knowing that someone's going to come and check what you did behind you. So there has to be some kind of expectation that you're going to be held to some kind of a standard or lack of safety, if you will. So I think that you probably want to segment it out by the type of work being done and expect that some lack of safety is a good thing.
Yeah. The thing I'll say in this space is I feel like this kind of became somewhat of like a political litmus test almost, where if you actually look into all the research about psychological safety, the kind of the critical juncture for me is, can people have disagreements? And if you look in the research, what they would say in the most psychologically safe environments, this should be rife with opportunity to have civil disagreements about different things. But if you look how it manifested in the workplace, is it was actually like only a psychologically safe environment means we have no disagreements, right? And only one kind of viewpoint is acceptable. And so I always saw like psychological safety in kind of the broader popular press sense ended up being kind of a tool or a weapon that people use to kind of shut down kind of disagreements. Where in the literature itself, it's like saying this is where you should be able to have those disagreements. So I don't know if you had that experience, but that was definitely kind of where I've experienced it in the workplace up until now.
Yeah, and I think that there are certainly thresholds where things shut down, and there are people who create that. So I think it's good to, certain environments might be expected to be, I guess, less open, but really I think it comes down to just the people who are there. You might have that scenario where you say, well, this is not going to be safe, this environment, because we have shown that 95% of the time it's not. But the people there are probably, they're what dictate what the reality. And it's going to be different. Like tech firms are going to be different than a government agency. So I think that's why, just got to chop up the population into these different test scenarios.
Yeah, or just not be overconfident that we actually know something and there's like a panacea that's going to be a cure all for everything. But I want to hit you with the next one we got here. It's not really an article. I just thought it was fascinating. And I imagine you will too. A post by a guy named Bruno Gonzalez. He talks about Stripe. So this is the financial payments firm that's a very famous kind of startup, even though they're not really a startup anymore. They're so big. But he said Stripe trained a transformer, so think large language models. But instead of learning natural language, it learned the language of payments. And so they took discrete structured payment data and like think of large massive tables of transaction information, and were able to just put it through this transformer, the large language model. And what they found is it created a general purpose model of encoding rich transaction information that could be used across a variety of tasks for the firm. And the funny thing is, if you look at the results, it kind of looks like an organizational network analysis or an O&A. But one of the things that they found is it increased the detection of card testing attacks. So I would think like this might be like credit card fraud from 59% to 97% overnight, which is wild. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on this one of just like another novel use of a current technology on a completely different set of data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. First impression is awesome. I think that 20 years ago, how do you test for fraud? Well, sometimes people just see if a card works and they charge $2 on it, and if you suddenly come back 2 minutes later with a $100 charge, that might be fraud. This is obviously that to the nth degree as far as accuracy and creativity is concerned. So yeah, I think it's really, really pretty sweet. I think that this is, as we mentioned before, this kind of thing is going to become more common across more industries. And we talked about what does it do to the workforce. Not only does it improve the detection from, was it 64 to 95 or something like that, the number of people needed to actually monitor all those different claims, some of them just don't happen in the first place then. So you need the 100 divided by, I don't know, 4, 5, as far as number of people to actually monitor everything that's going on, and your quality improves. So this is going to happen in all industries, all different tasks. The big thing is they just have to embrace the technology, adopt it, understand that it's not perfect, try to figure out how to make those imperfections, they're not going to be perfect, they're just going to be closer to perfect. But I think that this is just going to continue. Really cool stuff.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I've got one more quick article for you, and it's called How Psychological Study Results Have Changed Since the Replication Crisis Began. And I thought this was a fascinating one. This is one of the general themes of the podcast when we first started, was just talking about how science itself has just really gotten over its skis, because so many of the major findings in the softer sciences like psychology and sociology have not stood up to replication. And so that's where the replication crisis came about. But the good news is many scientific journals and just researchers themselves have started to adopt better practices for how to do science more effectively. And one of the things that they found of the results, I couldn't find it today, but there was this visualization that showed the number of statistical positive findings that had been submitted to journals over time. And they've just seen the number of statistically, like basically their hypotheses being confirmed that are submitted to journals has just plummeted over the last few years, which does two things at the same time. One is it increases my trust in the science, that actually, we're not finding a new finding under every rock, and there's just this proliferation of probably findings that won't stand up to replication. But two, I imagine it's becoming much easier to publish if you don't find positive findings. And I think that in itself is probably going to increase a lot of trust in science. But did you get a chance to look at this one, and have you had any thoughts or experiences with the replication crisis?
So when I started to read this, I honestly thought I'd read it before. Probably 3 years ago, one of the things on a reading list I had for school was something very similar that covered this topic. But I saw this came out, I think, in May, so I did not read this before. But, interestingly enough, when I was in that one school program, they didn't mention putting caveats around when different research articles were actually done. So they were not actually saying, there was no criticism or skepticism, we'll say, of things that were gathered during that time that was suspect. But we did talk about the fact that it did exist. I like that they mentioned the sample surveys, or the samples getting larger to try to correct the problem. This is kind of what we talked about earlier with the Michael Jordan or the NBA and anchoring bias thing, where we wanted to be repeatable. That was only 30 samples. So, would it have been better if we had 100 samples? Probably. Would it have been more repeatable? Probably. So I think that it's a good practice to have more samples. I think it's a good practice to not just throw articles out that are not necessarily vetted with good sources. I think that's part of the magic in a lot of these articles, is that you expect that if you repeat it, you'll have the same result. I'll throw one more thing out. For our anchoring discussion, my concern was that it wouldn't be repeatable, and because the thing that you're doing a study on is constantly being updated. So, which would be a great thing. I would love it if I redid all of those and there would be no anchoring bias. That's where it's supposed to go. So in some cases, you don't want it to be repeatable, but in that case, that's a little, at that moment in time, it was true. So I think that's a good thing for people to understand, that some things should not be repeatable because they should be corrected over time. But in cases that are where it should be, I think they mentioned, if it's like a psychological test, theoretically a lot, those shouldn't be evolving terribly quickly. They should be repeatable. So I think it was a good article to cover the fact that sampling needs to be, substantial enough that it can be repeated. But I do think that based on the kind of article, the content, we should expect things not to be repeatable in every case.
Yeah, we had a previous guest, Dr. Marcus Crede from, I believe it's Iowa State University, and he came on the podcast like 2 years ago and said he thought 40% of research, if not more, was just completely fabricated. And so what makes me excited about seeing findings like this article is that even if he was right or wrong, that some of these problems should be improving. And I think that is really important as a society right now. But Scott, it's been fantastic having you on the podcast. I've been trying to get you on here for a while. Thanks so much for what you're doing in terms of the knowledge that you're sharing with the world. Anywhere people can find you or your newsletters, and any final words you want to share with the audience?
It's been great being here. I appreciate it. We talked about the fantasy football thing. So that's ffinsights.com. So that'll be up and running probably within a month. So please check that out if you like fantasy football. The people analytics content is put on there as well, but I think I'm going to shift that probably to a different site because not everybody wants to look at fantasy football. I reckon also.
For everybody?
No, it's not for everybody. I'm doing a little thing with my kids. It's called Logic Bully, logicbully.com. It's with LLMs. I'm trying to teach them how to use ChatGPT, Claude, Copilot, Gemini, just to see how each of them works, and the problems of how they don't work, as we've mentioned. So we're doing the news, basically liberal, moderate, conservative news sites, aggregating them all up, seeing where they agree, where they disagree, and doing like a 2-minute summary. So that's something else I've been playing with, but that's about it for me. But again, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for joining, Scott. You've been listening to Directionally Correct, the People Analytics podcast with Colin Scott. Today's guest, Scott Reida. Thanks for joining us, Scott.
Bye.